Hey everybody, this is Pastor Megan Rohrer. I'm the pastor at Grace Lutheran in San Francisco. I'm also a chaplain for the San Francisco Police Department. And tonight we are going to talk a little bit about what it would mean for people in an emergency to consider answering crisis line phone calls. Some of the tips about how to do it well, maybe some of the cautions about why not to do it if you're not trained. And I have with me a special guest. Valerie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Reverend Valerie McEntee. I'm the lead night minister at San Francisco Night Ministry. We've been around for 55 years now, coming up on 56. We do nighttime street ministry in San Francisco between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. We go out every night. There's at least one minister on the street. We walk around, we talk to people, we see how they're doing. Once in a while, we do some crisis intervention. We give people referrals and socks, and these days, hand sanitizer. And in addition to that, we have a telephone line that we've been running for that whole time. So we know a few things about running a crisis line and what makes it work and what doesn't work so well. And I myself have been with night ministry for 12 years, about a year and a half in this lead role. And so Megan asked me to come and share some thoughts with you all tonight.
Yeah. So one of the things to kind of know at the beginning of this conversation is what people's brains are like in the middle of a crisis. And so just the kind of like quick version of that, because we'll have other videos about like how trauma affects your brain, is that people no longer have access to the part of their brain that is doing long-term memory. That means that people don't always understand instructions that you're giving them verbally. It's much easier to give them instructions written down. They might not, because they can't retain the answer to the question, they might ask you the same question 17 times. Their focus really is on caring for their immediate needs. And so they might have more urgency in what's happening. They might not have the same access to their feelings. They might have grief, even if it's just grief that this situation is happening. And that can mean people have large amounts of anger, anger directed towards people who they can't get in trouble being angry about. So like an anonymous person on the phone could be someone. And know that caring for someone through their anger, having someone be angry at you, can be helpful for that person because they're venting and getting it out and not being angry towards someone where there might be legal ramifications for that. But that you also are a person going through crisis, right? This virus is something that is making us all a little bit fearful, making us all wonder about our mortality and about our own immune system health. And so you don't deserve to be yelled at and should have good boundaries around that. And Pastor Valerie will talk a little bit more about that. But knowing that we don't know what would happen on a crisis call, ideally in our brain, if we imagine calling people during a crisis to help them out, we imagine people being so excited that we called. Thank you so much for calling. We imagine them being lonely and are calling them, maybe making this connection. But what we forget is that we're calling or talking, someone's calling us who is a stranger. And that if you've ever felt awkward at a party because you said the wrong thing or felt the wrong way and weren't sure if you could help, it feels that way when you're talking to strangers on the phone. So knowing that there are moments where it could be awkward or that the phone call might feel different than we imagined or hoped in our hearts, what are some ways that people can prepare themselves before they even pick up the phone to be someone who's ready to answer whatever happens when they answer that phone call?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to do that. And the first thing, and kind of the most important, and you already touched on it a little bit, is the boundaries. A lot of us think of boundaries as kind of this straitjacket that keeps us from doing what we think we need or want to do. But I really like to think of boundaries as scaffolding. They hold us up and they keep us steady and they give us the support we need to do what we want to do. So I'm sure you all will have some organizational boundaries that like they're flat and hard, that I'm sure you won't be giving people your cell phone number. You won't be, sharing the information about other phone counselors, that kind of thing. You'll have those very hard and fast rules that are there for a reason, and you need to abide by them. But I would encourage anyone who chooses to do this to also decide your personal boundaries. How much is
Mhm.
too much? And because people have a very varying tolerance, and it's not that a high tolerance is better or a low tolerance is worse or anything. We just all have different tolerances and different tolerances for different things. And we see this in our phone counselors. It's important to respect your own tolerance. Because you burn yourself out really quickly if you absorb more anger than you personally can tolerate, or more sadness than you can tolerate, or more fear than you can tolerate, or more happy and excited babbling from somebody who's just going on and on and on that you can tolerate. So it's important to kind of know your personal boundaries, which is a little easier if you've done this work before. If you haven't, though, I encourage people to reflect on that a little bit, and you'll learn very fast once you're on the line what your boundaries are. And I really urge people to respect their own boundaries as well as the organizational boundaries. With the anger, what we direct our phone counselors to do is it's fine to let people be angry, especially if it's I'm mad at my mother or my boss or whatever. But when they start being personally nasty, we give them one warning and then we hang up. And that sounds really mean, but if you let someone go on and on abusing you, what you're doing is letting them practice that behavior. And then that behavior is more likely to come up in other places in their life where it's going to do them some harm. So we really encourage our phone counselors, if people start swearing at you, if people are personally nasty to you, if people start being sexual with you, which is something you will hear if you're on the phone line for any amount of time, or even breathing heavy and it feels wrong and it feels weird, to say, this is really something I'm not comfortable with. I'm afraid I'm going to have to hang up if you don't stop this. And then if the person doesn't stop, to enforce that and hang up, because that makes you trustworthy. If you say you're going to do it and then you do it, then you're trustworthy. So that's an important boundary to highlight. Another thing that can help people prepare for being on this line is, if you have a spiritual practice, to practice that before your shift on the phone. If you have a meditation practice, to meditate. If you're in a spiritual path that prays, to pray. If you have if you cast spells, to do that. Whatever your spiritual practice is, practice that a little bit before you get on the phone, to just help yourself be a little more grounded. Another thing is to know you're going to get all kinds of calls. We don't call people who don't call us at night ministry, so I have less familiarity with that, but you'll get people starting to call back all the time once they know about you and learn what a wonderful phone counselor you are. And they may want somebody else in specific and say, oh, you're not Joe, and so they'll hang up the phone. It's not personal. They may really adore you one minute and then suddenly be very angry with you. It's not personal. And it's just to remind yourself of that. Whatever they're doing, it's probably a heck of a lot more about them than about you. People's past will get funneled through the crisis. So this thing that happened to them in second grade will be brought up by this crisis. This other thing that happened to them, in their youth, will be funneled. How they feel about their parent will be funneled through this crisis. So you'll get a lot of old stuff that you are not going to unwind in a phone call. It's letting go of this notion that you're going to kind of fix everything. I guess is what I'm getting at. I always say night ministry, either on the phones or on the street. It's really great if you want to practice non-attachment to outcome. You will get repeat callers who will call back with the same problem night after night or week after week. We have folks who've been doing that for years, and they have mental health care outside of us. Good, it sounds like good mental health care. They have a lot of other support, and people just get stuck. And to just be able to be with them in their stuckness is invaluable. to people. So that's another thing to prepare yourself, is just to realize solving, if somebody says, where do I go get food? You can solve that for them. Oh yes, St. Anthony's is still serving, or Martin de Porres is still serving. But if they don't ask for any particular advice, I would stay away from solving. The fine art of shutting up is invaluable for people. And you might even practice that in some of your personal conversations as you're preparing to go on the line. Just listening, letting it be what it is, not trying to fix it. It's much harder than it sounds until you get used to doing it. But it kind of works some magic sometimes. If you are looking for an outcome, that may be the only way you're going to get it. But most of the time, you're not going to get an outcome that, at least maybe not the one you're hoping for. Mm-hmm. And people will want other outcomes. I guess maybe, do you want to move into some skills, or where?
Yeah, let's do that. I think it was really helpful when you were talking about how people can kind of listen in a fully present way.
Yeah.
Are there tips of like maybe phrases that you might recommend for helping a conversation, having a like phrase that you can say that helps a conversation keep moving, even if you can't solve a problem and you want to let someone know you're listening, that can help with that?
The gold standard is and then they talk some more and you go, and then they talk some more and you say, and a lot of people will just keep talking, and that's all they need. If they seem like they need more than that, get curious. Oh, what leads you to believe that whatever that is? And it may be like a political view or a religious view that's really hard for you to hear. And it's really tempting to want to change somebody's mind, but you're not going to. Your better bet is to be curious. Oh, that, what nourishes you about that notion? Or how did you come to believe that? Or, lots of curious questions. Or what happened next? If they're telling you a story, oh, what happened next? Or how did you feel about that thing? All those kind of things. Just lots of curious questions. They don't have to be fancy and spiffy, and reflecting people's emotion. That sounds really scary. Oh, I'd be really sad if that was me. Or, and sometimes they'll go, no, that's not it at all. I'm like, okay, fine. And back, and then you just go on with the conversation. But a lot of times people feel very deeply heard if you just hear their emotion.
There's a type of trauma care that is called somatic experiencing. And it's about how people can heal from trauma, particularly in a crisis, how they can do it without telling their story. Because sometimes the telling of the traumatic story is triggering. And especially if people are answering the phone and they're not trained robustly, doing things that deeply get into people's trauma might, my theory is always don't do anything you're not trained to do, right? So if you're not trained,
absolutely.
If you're not trained to delve into people's emotions, don't delve into people's emotions. But one of the things that somatic experiencing encourages is if the person you are talking to is really drowning in negativity, just everything is terrible, and they just need to tell you everything in the world that is terrible, that the strategy when talking to someone like that is called pouncing on the positive. And Peter Levine has written a book on this. But when they say anything even slightly positive, something they hate less than everything else they've been talking about, you pounce on the thing that they liked a little bit and you ask them 1,000 questions about it. And what you're doing is helping people notice that they do have positive in their life, even if the negative is so much bigger. And you expand the amount of time they're able to tolerate talking about that positive, so that the next time you talk to them, maybe you can talk about the positive a little bit longer. And then the next time you talk to them, maybe they can talk about the positive a little bit longer. And it helps people get a more balanced way of seeing the world, because trauma is not something you are stuck with forever. Trauma is a fear of an incident that happened in the past. And the mistake of trauma is not that you were afraid, it's that the circumstances that made you afraid don't exist in the present. And so helping people notice that their present has some positivity, that they might be safer now than the thing that was happening in the past. People in the middle of this coronavirus emergency are in the middle of an emergency, but there are probably some positive things that are happening in their life. Maybe they're now at home with a bunch of their kids who they don't get to see very often, and they might be fighting, but they're glad to be around their kids more. Or they might be safe, right? Even though they don't have the same physicality they wish that they could. And so if you have an opportunity in a phone call to just ask follow-up questions about positive things that have happened, you don't have to do that in every phone call, because sometimes it will make people really mad. It will make them really angry, because they'll kind of figure out that,
It's a great
yeah.
technique.
So most things that you're thinking about, you have to kind of like weigh it with what's actually happening. And then when in doubt, go back to what Pastor Valerie was talking about. When in doubt, just zip it and listen. I was at a training not too long ago where they pointed out that the same letters in listen form the word silent.
Oh, I never noticed that, but right. And it's so, it to me, I have a master's degree, I have a year of postgrad, I got a lot of tools in my toolbox, and to do good ministry and good chaplaincy. But honestly, one of the most powerful tools in my toolbox is silence. Even when somebody calls and says, I want to kill myself, and I'm like, oh, I don't want you to die. Tell me what's going on. And then I shut up for as long as I can. Like literally say nothing as long as I can. And sometimes by the time they're done telling me all about it, they're past it. And then sometimes you do these things like you pounce on that one little thing, and then that starts to draw their attention away and open up that space. And there's all kinds of things you can do that are too in-depth for this video. But
well, one thing that people could do is refer someone to like a suicide hotline. Right. Or if they have the kind of phone where it allows them to do a three-way call, to actually join in people who are trained in suicide, right. Suicide care, right. At the same time, so that that person gets some support.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I don't know how in depth you want me to go on the suicide thing. I could talk a little bit about assessment if you want. Or
no, I would say let's just encourage people to refer,
okay,
unless they have specific training in that. Under the same thing as like, don't give legal advice if you're not trained as a lawyer. Don't give medical advice if you're not trained as a nurse. And one of the things that you can do too is if you're in a stuck place of you don't know why someone's called, if they're calling into a crisis line, and you want to find out if you are feeling the thought, I don't know what to do. The question that is available for you in that moment is, what kind of help are you looking for? Are you wanting help to fix something? Are you wanting me to just listen? Are you wanting me to encourage you like a cheerleader? What kind of support are you looking for? And then if what they're looking for from you is not something you're trained or able to give, you can be really frank with the person and not waste their time about that.
Right. I will tell people, oh, that's outside my scope. Here's who I think might be able to help you with it more. And yeah. It's really, really, really important to do that, because it's like, I wouldn't go in and try brain surgery because I don't know how to do that. I don't have the first clue how to do that. And I think it's really important that we do stay within the realm of what we're trained for. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a very good point.
So we've talked a little bit about how to prepare before a call. We've talked a little bit about ways that people can be on a call. What is something that people can do after a call to care for themselves? Or I would say to not bring it home, but the reality is many of us, at least here in the Bay Area, are stuck home. And so if people are making phone calls from home, like, are there rituals or things that people can do to transition out of being a crisis listener, right, and to just be a person back in their home again at the end?
Yeah, there's a few things. One of the things that we practice here at Night Ministry, I don't know if you'll have this capability, but we always at the end of the night check in with our phone counselors and say, how'd it go? Were there any particularly difficult calls? Was there one you really liked? You know, all that kind of thing. And we just debrief for like 10 or 15 minutes. And it gives people a chance to talk about it and kind of get it off their chest. And of course, we're not going home to talk to our families about it. So it's good to have a supervisor or somebody you can talk to about it. Until just recently, we had the transition of physical space. We don't have that now. All our phone counselors are working from home. And y'all will be too, I'm assuming. But if you have a specific place that you take these phone calls, that is like, I'm assuming you want some sort of private space from your family, but like not your bedroom, and maybe like that's as far away from the, if you have a house and you can go downstairs to the laundry room or something, you know, or even in your apartment, if there's one spot that you're not as often in your apartment, kind of make that your spot for phone calls and have one spot for phone calls so that you can transition out of that space physically, even if it's just going into another room. That can be helpful. Again, with your spiritual tradition, if you have some ritual of release, be it meditation, be it prayer, be it, you know, however you give things up to your divine presence, I would really strongly encourage that. And even if it's not routine on this line to debrief with the supervisor, if there's something that's still bothering you the next day, call your supervisor, talk to them. Just telling the story of the story that you heard that's sticking in your brain and it's really was hard for you to hear, yeah, it can be very, very helpful. Just as it's helpful for the callers to tell you all about it, it'll be helpful for you to tell somebody else all about it.
And if you were at home and you were caring for someone like that and you had any symptoms of vicarious trauma, vicarious just means I heard a story that was trauma to someone else, but vicarious trauma does impact people who are listening or people who are trying to support people. So you can Google how to care for vicarious trauma. It's most of the self-care that is good for everything, but some of the things that can help is to like get things out of your brain. If there's something that wakes you up at 3 a.m, if it's a sound, if it's a image, if it's a thought, just get it out of your brain by writing it down, by calling another person that you can share it with.
All Night Ministry will hear you.
Yeah. What's the Night Ministry phone number that they can call at 3 a.m?
It's 415-441-0123. Again, that's 415-441-0123. Normally you get a live person answering. Right now, we're kind of jury rigging because everybody's working from home. So what you'll do is get an answering service and then somebody will call you back shortly. Unfortunately, we've got that little delay built in as we try and figure out our technology to make it work a little more smoothly. But absolutely call us. We're used to hearing hard stories. Our phone counselors are very well trained. Our ministers are very well trained. And so by all means, if it's the middle of the night, call Night Ministry. We'll talk to you. It may be a little while before we get to you. We're getting a lot of calls, even more than normal now.
I bet.
We will call you, and we answer every call that comes in before 4. So if you call us, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this. If you call us at 3:55, we may call you back at 5. I hesitate to say that out loud, but that's our practice. So just call between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. and somebody will call you back. They may not have more than maybe 20 minutes to talk to you if they're really backed up, but we'll call you back. And then if it's daytime, I'd say call your supervisor. Normally when people have had trauma, I say, tell the story to people, tell it in order. That's really important. If somebody starts to tell you a story and it's all jumbled and out of order, you might encourage them to say, oh, did that happen before that or after that? It's a little less re-traumatizing if they're telling it in order than out of order. And just a little side note, but for you, it's confidential, so you can't tell your spouse. I'm assuming this line is confidential.
Right.
You can't tell your spouse or your brother or whoever. But I would talk to your supervisor, or again, you can call Night Ministry and tell us all about it.
Yeah.
You're up in the middle of the night like we are.
That's right. Some other things that you can do is one of the things that I'll do, because I've also done some of the crisis line answering. And when I've done it from home, what I'll do is I'll change clothes It's easy when
Yeah.
you're doing the night ministry because you like put pajamas on then, but
Right.
so changing clothes,
Take a
you could take a
shower.
shower. Yeah, any of that stuff to just change your brain and let your brain know that you're not listening to those stories anymore,
Take
can be
a
really
nap
helpful.
if you can. You know, even if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just lay down and take a nap and let your brain sort of integrate it as it will during sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. And then self-care, if you can get it. We're still allowed currently in San Francisco to take walks and hikes.
Yep.
Cardio, they say scientifically, is the number one way to heal from trauma. But, you know, if eating or shopping too much does it for you, it's way better to be overweight and still alive and taking care of yourself. It's way better to have too high of a credit card bill than to not be alive to take care of yourself, right? So anything that is a good self-care choice for you, I encourage you to make it, particularly one that's not harmful to yourself or to other people. And tomorrow, when you're not having the full day of listening to trauma on the phone line, make safer choices, right? So today, make the choices that help you get through anything that's hard, and then tomorrow make safer choices when you can.
Right. And if, you know, I'm not sure how you're planning to space your volunteers, but I would encourage people not to have too many shifts.
Yeah.
If you have enough volunteers, if people can volunteer just once a week. Here at Night Ministry, we say no more than twice a month because we get a lot of challenging calls. So I really try and have people not be on the phones more than twice a month because they kind of burn out. But twice a month gives you a little space to.
Yeah.
Our longest serving phone counselor has been at it for, I think, 53 years now.
Wow.
And I ask him his secret, and he says, I never take more than one shift a month. And so he's been able to do it all that time.
Yeah. And the good news is that even if you are hearing stories of people in an emergency, even if you're hearing stories of people who are needing help, most people survive crises like these. And no matter the traumatic story you hear, most people are resilient and don't have lingering effects that lead towards like a trauma-related injury. So that's also a really helpful thing to just remember, is that you're hearing the emergent needs, you're hearing the crisis moments, but that's not that person's full life. It's just the moment that they interacted with you. Most of their life is lovely and blossoming and,
Right.
and brilliant.
And to calibrate your own sense of crisis, not to diminish what somebody else is feeling at all. I don't mean it that way at all, but in your own mind to go like, okay, they're breathing. All right, that's the first checkbox. Next checkbox, anybody gushing blood? No? Okay. Anybody on fire? All right, we're not in crisis. If I can check those 3 boxes, it's not a crisis. And it doesn't mean the person's not upset, and it doesn't mean it doesn't feel like a crisis to them. But those are my check boxes. And if I can check all 3, it's not crisis. And not to say it's not upsetting, it's not horrible, it's not traumatic. But if none of those things are happening, you have time to take a breath.
That's right.
Think about what you're going to say. If none of those things are happening, you can say, I think this might be outside my scope, and here's who might be able to help you with it. If none of those things are happening, you can say, I need to think about that for a minute. I'm not sure. You know, you have time if none of those things are happening.
Yeah. The good thing when you're taking calls, when people are calling in, is that you know that no matter how hopeless someone's story sounds, they knew they needed help.
Right.
And that puts them really high above some other people who have problems and don't know they need help or aren't willing to reach out for it. So they dialed at least 7 digits and took 1 step towards getting help, which means it's possible that they could take more steps. We just don't know, right? The other thing that I would say, just in case people are watching this and trying to consider whether or not they should start up a crisis line, I do want to say that I think everyone should be trained in mandated reporting and how that can work on the phone as a bare minimum of if you're going to do anything like this.
Yes, get those calls too.
Yeah. Is there anything else you think we should add on here? Kind of, this isn't really a like how-to. Don't feel like you're fully trained and ready to take on a suicide support line after this. It's really just primarily a conversation that helps people know some of the basics of what they would need to prepare for and to be a crisis line caller, but also to discern should I be a crisis line caller, or should I donate to places who have done this for much longer and might just
Right, right,
expand their hours right now, right?
right. It's, I mean, our training, our phone counselor training for night ministry is about 35 hours.
Yeah.
So it just, you know, it's a lot more than this, but
Yes.
just to understand your own tolerance for listening to other people's pain, to listening to people who feel that they're in crisis, but you're like, but compared to that last guy, your life is great, you know, and just to be able to hold some empathetic space anyway, and some sympathetic space. Um, and to know that there's no shame in trying it out and finding out that it's not right for you. You know, sometimes people come on our line and they work, you know, they train once and then go, oh no, this is not right for me, you know, even after just listening in one night. And sometimes they get through the training and they work a couple of months and they go, oh, you know, this isn't really what I thought it would be. And so, all right, then there's something, you're called to something else. I guarantee there's something else that you have the gifts for that is needed. And maybe just this isn't it. So I think it's something to think about given what you've heard in this video. And if it sounds like something good to try, try it, but give yourself permission to figure out that it's not the right fit.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and sharing some of your wisdom, and lots of prayers and love and support for you and all the people who are working crisis lines tonight and every night.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation. You have a good night.
You too.